I can't hear very well because I'm
sorry.
really deaf.
Don't worry. I was just asking, is these airbags in the back of the head?
Yes.
so I had to get up and do